Right. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, my name is Eric Meyer. I'm the Dean of the School of Information. I'd like to welcome you here this afternoon. I saw some of you were earlier to the luncheon that we had, but also some of you come in for this afternoon. It's really great to welcome you here to the 8th annual celebration of the founding of the school, which is our 107th year. And when I first got here last year, so I've been here for a year now, I said, we're having a 106th birthday. It's a little unusual. And the people explained to me, actually, it was because they didn't really do annual events until the 100th, when obviously there's a 100th anniversary. It's the time to think about that. And everybody had such a good time. They were like, well, we should do this every year, rather than wait for 125 or 200 or something like that. So I think it's great. It's a good opportunity to get together, to reflect upon the long history of a school like this, and to think about the future of it. I'll have a few comments at the very end of this afternoon's presentations, talking about some opportunities we've got and some things we've done here, but we're going to have a few speakers that are hopefully going to engage you in interesting ways for the afternoon. So I do have a little bit of housekeeping. So this event is being live streamed and recorded and may be posted online. If you ask questions or make comments, they may be included in the live stream and recording. So be aware of that. If you don't want to be live streamed or recorded, don't speak up. And we can talk to people afterwards if you've got questions that you don't want to have recorded. So anyway, there's me. I'm the Dean, the Chancellor's Professor of Social Informatics here at Berkeley. It's absolutely my delight to be able to lead a school like this. Like I said, I've been here for a year. Previously, I was a Dean for 6 years. UC Austin School of Information, and before that, I was at Oxford University. And one of the things that I think is nice about a place with a rich history, it's one of the things that's beautiful about my time at Oxford. I worked really nice about my time at Oxford was I worked in a building that was built in like 1612. And so it reminds you right every day when you go in about the richness of history and how you can learn from what's happened in the past. So opportunities like this are a great time for us to both reflect and also look forward. So I think one of the things that is exciting is the range of expertise that have come out of and been associated with the school. So we've got 3 speakers this afternoon who represent different areas of expertise that I hope you all find engaging. I've heard them all speak previously, and I think you're going to enjoy what you have to hear this afternoon. So the first great speaker is Inouye, who is a PhD in '97 in Library and Information Studies, a writer and advisor on public policy, with 28 years of national public policy experience. I was talking to him at lunch, and he said even though he officially retired from ALA, he's back working for ALA again on new projects. So it didn't last very long in full retirement. He served as a senior director of the American Library Association, coordinator of the President's Council on Advisors in Science and Technology, as study director at the National Academy of Sciences. And he's going to be speaking to us this afternoon about his career and a lot of the things that he's learned in his experience working with librarians, the ALA, and government. Following Alan, we're going to be hearing from Hany Farid, one of our faculty members. Hany Farid is a professor at the School of Information and at the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and he's one of the foremost experts on deepfakes. You probably have either recognized that name because you've seen it in the media, or once you hear him, you'll realize that you've seen him in the media. He's in the media a lot lately because there are a lot of deepfakes that he's going to tell you about. I can tell you from past experience hearing him, he often leaves audiences a little bit shaken because of what you might learn is going on around you. But I think it's a good opportunity to learn more about how the expertise at a place like this iSchool is helping the whole world understand the digital technologies and the AI tools that are being used. He's also a member of the Berkeley Artificial Intelligence Lab, the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, the Center for Innovation in Vision and Optics, Development Engineering, the Vision Science Program, and he's a faculty advisor to the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. And he's going to be talking about trust and truth in the age of generative AI. And then the final speaker this afternoon, who's still getting over here in traffic, I believe, is high school PhD candidate Lauren Chambers. She studies the intersection of data technology and socio-political advocacy with Professor Deirdre Mulligan, and was the staff technologist at the ACLU in Massachusetts. Her current research that she's going to be talking about explores the role of public interest technologists in civil society. Oh, there she is. Right on time. Just right on time. She got in here to hear her introduction. So I'm going to hand over to the speakers. There will be opportunities for questions at the end of each talk. And then I'll come back a little bit later this afternoon and tell you a few other things about that are going on here at the school that hopefully you find interesting. So let me hand over to Alan.
Thank you, Dean Meyer. I'm timing myself because I have 30 minutes or less, so I tend to talk too much. So, but you mentioned the lunch, and so I did want to thank you for that. Dean Meyer was in DC June, I think, and he reached out and we had lunch and talked about the current goings on in our federal government. You can imagine, but more to the point, though, that in his first year, he's really trying to reach out to all the important stakeholders of the school. So I'm very, very happy that he's doing that, and just want to commend him on his excellent start in his tenure as dean. And I'm looking forward to what comes out. Well, not what comes after this year, in the years to come. So just a little bit about how I plan to address today in my time with you. Talk a little bit about setting the stage and going back to my time at South Hall, which was in the 1990s. And I received my PhD in 1997 here. I'll talk a little bit about trends and forces, but just briefly, but talk about what is public policy for the library and information studies sector. Because I think it's much broader than what many people might think. But perhaps try to spend more time on what's happening today and the responses for today, that is for the year 2025. And importantly, what about tomorrow and the ultimate question in terms of the evolution or devolution or what have you. But where are we going? So some of you will recognize these two photos. They're from the 1993 period when there was a proposal to close the School of Library and Information Studies and some other programs on campus, the Department of Art Practice and some other smaller units. And so, of course, there was a pushback and advocacy to try to stop that. And I happened to be the chair of the doctoral forum, doctoral students group at that time. So I became the de facto head advocate, which was rather odd for me since I came here actually to study, to become a management consultant with my PhD. So obviously that did not pan out. But it was quite a time back then. In fact, some of the people that you see in the photo are actually in this room today.
Thank you.
I won't name names in case they don't want to be.
I think we see each other there.
You might recognize them or something. So just because of my transit, so I got into public policy as a matter of accident, actually. It wasn't intentional, but Berkeley did it and South Hall did it, and I can blame Dean Meyer, even though he wasn't here, but he's now in charge, so you get blamed. Yeah. But I'm very happy that transformation happened. But it wasn't my intention at that time. But life has plans for you sometimes, and a lot has changed since 1997, obviously. And that I had this career going from the National Academy of Sciences, as is mentioned, and then to the President's Council of Advisors in Science and Technology. And I won't mention NIRC, because it's really there's a lot of acronyms, which I probably won't have time to explain everything. If you have questions, they can ask. And then to ALA, and then leading public policy and lobbying for ALA for quite a few years. And I did retire from ALA in May of this year, but in June, I was hired back as a consultant on public policy and lobbying. And so I'm still working on things there, but I'm not formally representing, just to make that clear. So life in 1997, I won't really talk about this much since you all kind of know, but it was a very different world. It was primarily an analog world, not a digital world, but it was a golden age of internet policy. So it was actually a very special time in terms of where we are today and going forward. There were major legislation, the High Performance Computing and Communications Act of 1991, the Telecom Act of 1996, and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. In particular, and of course, famously, Al Gore, created the internet or invented the internet, and so on. But one thing I did want to mention in particular, though, was the rise of the internet policy advocacy groups, which occurred, a lot of it occurred in the 1990s. Well, the Electronic Frontier Foundation was established in 1990, and then the latest one of that string, the Public Knowledge, was established in 2001. But that's the time when many of these groups came to the fore. And at the National Research Council, the NRC, CSTB, a lot of the seminal policies, major national policy studies on the internet were done during that time. Digital copyright, digital privacy, cyber security, and things like that. And lastly, that there was a lot of optimism at that time about how the internet and the digital world was going to be democracy for all and access for all and all of that, which of course has been actually ended up being a mixed bag. Just to say a little bit more about the trends, I'm not going to talk about advances in hardware and networking, and we all kind of know what's happened there. But there have been some, but things have changed a lot since that time. I just want to make that point. Right? In 1997, there wasn't really social media, there was no smartphones, there were a lot of things. It's a very different time. And the reason why trends and forces are important to public policy, why am I, he started to talk about public policy and lobbying, why is he talking about it? Is that, especially looking forward, because when you think about formulating public policy and lobbying for such, as you know, it often takes years to get something through, whether through Congress or through the regulation or whatever process. And sometimes it could be a decade or even longer. And then once that new law is established, it's probably going to sit there for a couple of years or decades or longer. So you really need to try to think about what kind of policy do you want and advocate for that's going to be viable for the next 30 years or something. So you need to look forward. It's always a matter of what are we going to need as opposed to what do we need today, which of course you need to address that too. But so looking at trends and the futurist thinking is closely tied to public policy and lobbying. So that's not, I think, often appreciated. Huge change in demographics and things. In 1997, the non-white percentage of the U.S. population was 21%. Last year, it was 42%. Right? Massive change in population composition. Also, a big change in the roles and responsibilities for libraries. And so, in short, that libraries have become much more involved, responsible for good, and maybe not necessarily for good, but it's the need is there, but for all kinds of social responsibilities and roles. You have people who don't have housing, you have people who have drug addiction, you have people who need to find urgent health information or what have you. That now often ends up on the doorstep of the libraries, people with food insecurity, whether it's children or college students or what have you. And so in the mid-2010s, in public libraries, Narcan became a new requirement, if you will, in many libraries in terms of having it available, providing training. I knew that librarians started keeping Narcan in their top desk drawer or even on their person. And so that became a new responsibility, if you will, of what it means to be a librarian. And so things have changed radically over the last 30 years. And obviously, politics has changed a tremendous amount during that time. One of the key times was, I think, in 1994, because the House of Representatives was controlled by Democrats for 40 years until 1994. And then that's when Speaker Gingrich got into power and the contract with America. And also you think about the trajectory, right? In the 1990s, we had President George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. And then we have the second term of Donald Trump today. It's actually a jarring juxtaposition when you think about it that way, in terms of substance and style. And particularly on style, because it's also become a lot nastier. It's not just the difference in policy opinion. It's also what you're thinking is wrong, it's bad. Librarians, dispense pornography, called names. It's become a very different environment. It's not just, I think this is the wrong policy proposal, and that we want to do this instead. So what is public policy for the library and information, library and information services sector? So of course, money is always important. It's money for programs and services and operations and preservation and research and all those kind of things. But it's also policy that's related to library values. It's not necessarily about library buildings or organizations per se, but it's about everyone should have access to information kind of value, but not necessarily tied to libraries per se. So in that sense, for example, in our work, we might be tied closely with journalists in terms of the First Amendment and promoting those kinds of values and policies. And it's also across many different agencies. The most library-specific one is the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, in terms of federal library funding. But there's actually a lot of library funding across the federal government, whether it's the National Endowment for the Humanities, or National Endowment for the Arts, or if you're into digital library research, the National Science Foundation. I mean, there's a lot of different places where funding comes from, the National Institutes of Health, and so on. As far as specific policy issues, there are many. So here are some of them, or a way to think about some of them, in a sense that, so there's technology, broadband, hardware, software, or if you will, it's the infrastructure of how we work. How do we get the information and access and engagement from here to there? And then there's the stuff or the content, right? So there's kind of two different buckets, if you will. And so we advocate pretty broadly, especially on broadband and in the past years, in terms of there have been quite a few policies related to that. Especially during the COVID period, there had been a lot of money available and bills, and that's been a major focus. As far as content, a big area is, of course, copyright and licensing. That's been one of our biggest challenges in libraries. That early on, we thought it was going to be great to have all this digital information. Information will be broadly accessible, but then we learned that wasn't really the case, or it wasn't so easy, because with copyright law, with print books, and with physical materials, there are a number of laws and rights that we have, which we simply don't have with digital material. Right? You just can't give stuff or sell your digital material to other people. It's all under contracts and licensing with various companies. So anyway, it's a big quagmire that we haven't yet resolved. But there's a lot of work there. And then to the First Amendment, one of the biggest issues is unfortunately related to book banning. And that's been a big issue at the state level that the community has been engaged with. But there have also been a few federal bills too on this, and is one of my concerns going forward in terms of this current climate. Another side of public policy for our sector is related to the social aspects of how libraries and librarians interact with communities. In terms of libraries that we help people find jobs, we help people with homework, help people find local services that they need for healthcare or what have you. We help new immigrants, no matter of their legal status. We help with veterans, and so in these kinds of programs, it implicates almost every agency in the government. So there's a lot of different kinds of interactions beyond library specific things. So just for one example, there was a bill on federal funding for electrical vehicle charging stations, and so in municipal government. And so from an ALA point of view, that libraries should be eligible for that funding, especially if you think about the parking lots of public libraries. It's an obvious place to us, but it's not an obvious place if you're sitting in Congress and you're trying to do this. And so that was a specific thing that was worked on. And of course, that's an example of lobbying where your goal is to insert one word in the bill, eligible entities, and you want to include libraries. So that did work. But there's so there are many different sectors where libraries are implicated and should be involved. That's beyond the most specific things that are pretty obvious. Food insecurity is another example in terms of funding to provide children with lunch during the summertime when there is no school lunch program, at least especially initially. And so, well, we could do that in the library. So how do we fund that? Oh, well, that should be part of the agriculture bill. So what's going on today? Here's another acronym, OMG. Another acronym you could use is WTF. It's quite a situation of things happening. But just a quick rundown of some of the more relevant ones for this discussion. There's the attempted closure of the Institute of Museum and Library Services by DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And so that has since been met with 2 lawsuits. A group of state attorneys general sued the Trump administration about that. And the ALA also, in a separate lawsuit, sued the Trump administration. And that's pending in federal court. But there is a preliminary injunction so that there is activity happening again. Although obviously there's been some damage with this whole upheaval that has taken place. The Library of Congress, there's also been a situation there in terms of Carla Hayden was fired, was terminated as Librarian of Congress. And the head of the Copyright Office, which is part of the library, there was also an attempt to fire her too, which has been kind of, well, there is an in-between state now. And that's also in federal court. There's been a lawsuit and that's moving forward. But for pretty much everything else that we care about, there have been challenges this year. In NARA, the National Archives. Of course, you may have read that the Archivist of the United States was also fired this year. And so we have as the acting Archivist of the United States, Marco Rubio, who is still the acting Archivist. The public Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS, of course, that was like headline news, so we know about that. I'm sure there have been many challenges. Some of them, there's been some success in federal courts, or at least the cases are still pending, so they haven't been dismissed. So there's some hope. There's also been some hope in Congress. So for the current fiscal year, 2026, so the president proposed to close IMLS, no surprise. But in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate, the Appropriations Committee said that we want to do more or less flat funding, right? Which is a very different idea than closing the agencies. And so there's going to be a big battle later on when this is all reconciled. But that is a hopeful sign that, in fact, these IMLS, for example, may well survive in some way. And that's true for a number of the other agencies too, that, whether it's in science and research or in other cultural agencies. And so there is some hope there. And so I just talked about kind of the different kinds of responses that are possible. So one, of course, is using the federal courts, which has had some effect, although it's far from perfect. And in the meantime, of course, there is great damage caused because, think about if you're an employee at IMLS or someplace and all this is happening and you're worrying about, well, am I going to have a job next month? Well, it depends on what happens in the court, depends what happens in Congress, depends what happens in the White House. Or if you're a prospective grantee, it's like, well, am I going to depend on this agency for my future funding? And so there has already been damage done, even if everything is restored the way it's supposed to be, according to law. But we can't do much about that. All we can do is fight back as well as we can. And federal court has been a really good place to do that. But Congress is important for the longer run because the federal courts can only help redress what the bad stuff that has happened. It can't guarantee future work or support or funding or anything. One particular, if the idea is to get rid of an agency. And so that is really important to continue that kind of advocacy. And also it's important because if you get a 25% budget cut, for example, that there's hope that in the future, well, maybe we'll be able to get some of that back. But once an agency is closed, it's going to be extremely difficult to reestablish it in the future, even if there's a very favorable regime at that time, because the demands will be so great, and it's a lot harder to establish an agency than it is to give you some of your money back. And so, that is really important to try to, to make sure that everything at least survives. I mean, it doesn't sound super optimistic, but that is the reality. So from a policy and lobbying perspective, so what are some of the things that folks like me think about? So one is that there has to be a brutal priority on focus. So there's always a priority on focus because there are so many possibilities and interests of things that we could do. But now there's so many challenges and problems to address so that you have to be really brutal on these are the two important things for us. We're going to focus on that. And the other things which normally we would want to be involved with, we just can't. Because we have to really do what's most important to our constituents. And also, along the similar vein, is that coalitions and allies are even more important than before. So for example, the lawsuit against the administration from ALA, the other plaintiff was AFSCME, the labor union for government employees. And so that's not one of our normal major partners. But in this case, it made sense, and having them, of course, brings more heft too. And we had another organization in Washington called Democracy Forward, which provided a lot of the legal support. And so, so the three of us working together made it much more feasible to actually do what we did, and very quickly. Because DOGE comes, you can't spend 5 months to figure out, well, are we going to sue or not, and how are we going to find the funding, and right, it has to be done right away. So for tomorrow, then, well, I mentioned the survival. So that's the most critical thing, is that we want as many agencies and programs to survive as possible, even if the budgets get cut. Because like I said, it's easier to restore funding in the future than an agency or a major program. That gridlock is actually welcome. Continuing resolution sounds like a fine idea now, because it means that things stay kind of stable in the sense of what's been happening. And then artificial intelligence is of course a major issue for the library and information services sector going forward. And so, the question is, so what kind of impact is that really going to have? There is a tremendous investment taking place, but is this actually warranted in terms of, is this like another industrial revolution really? Or is this a kind of a tech bubble and it's a little bit too much exuberance? And of course, we don't know the answer to that. And then from a library point of view, then there's also an impact on the library field, library workers, what's going to happen to their jobs. Will some of their jobs go away, but then new jobs will be created, just like when a lot of digital technology came to the fore. So there's these kind of questions. And then obviously elections are coming up, which are obviously important. And the cliche is that yeah, this presidential election is more important than ever. You all need to be involved and vote and et cetera. But I think it's really true this time around 2028 to 2029. And the reason is that there is the ultimate question is this a cycle? So is this a pendulum that has swung one way and that it's going to be swinging the other way? Or is this a new normal, a longer term phenomenon? And so what happens at that election really is important, because if it doesn't swing back and that election keeps it kind of with the way it's going, then is that going to be a new relatively permanent state, like for the next decades? So that there is a lot riding on that. There is actually a silver lining to all of this, even though it sounds kind of weird to say something like that. But there's been like incredible chaos this year in the federal, well, I guess in the whole country, but especially in the federal government. But the issue is that because of the way the federal government is structured, I mean, it's like a university, but like, several orders of magnitude larger. Right? There's a lot of structural inertia and people who, protect their own interests. And so change can be really hard, and, critical questioning of what is the right thing to do. And so this is actually an opportunity to start asking these kinds of questions in a more substantive way. I mean, that hasn't been kind of the motivation of what's been happening, but the fact that people are now asking, like, well, what is really important and how should it be funded and what should happen? And so this is actually a good time for people like us to be thoughtful and think about what is the right proposal. If you're creating IMLS or NSF or any of these kind of agencies today, would you create it the way it is structured now, or like in 2024? Just like with the university, if you were designing the University of California, Berkeley today, is this what you would design, what we have today? And the answer is obviously no, it's not. It's this way for all kinds of historical reasons. Some good and some not so good or rational. Well, at least not good now. They might have been good at the time, 50 years ago, but that's 50 years ago. So in fact, this is one of my projects, is actually working on this question in terms of what would be a better way to do this? Because if there is a new regime that's more favorable to our interests in 2029, they're going to need a playbook. They're going to need ideas of like, okay, so what should I do? I love libraries, I love research, I love universities. So do we just go back to 2024? And that would be a huge lost opportunity. We really need to figure out what would actually be best going forward. But someone has to do the heavy lifting, that hard work, and it's going to be people like us to do that. And so that's one of my major things that I'm started working on, but in the coming year, that's a big priority. Because it sounds like a long time. How can you talk about 2028 or 2029 when the house is burning down? It's like, well, no, you have to do that too. That's what happens. You got to file a lawsuit to go to federal court or whatever. Not saying you don't do that, but that's not enough, because 2028, 2029 is not that far away, and that if there is a more favorable regime, they're going to need help. Like, what do I do? They're not going to be experts on research, or education, or universities, or libraries, or what have you. And so that's on us to do. In the short run, one thing that we all can do also is to, get back to our members of Congress, or to our elected representatives in general. And it's like, well, I've heard things like, oh, my member of Congress is so much into universities and research and libraries. I don't really need to do very much to reach out to them. It's like, no, that's not true. It's required, but you have to be there. They have to hear that it's still important, and that they need to care and think about it, because other groups are doing that. So if they don't hear from us and they hear from those other groups, then when they get into making policy and decisions, they're going to remember, like, oh yeah, I got that, all of the call from Eric and from those other people, and they sent me, reports and articles and things, and that's what's going to gather my attention. The other thing, which we don't like to talk about very much, but there is also competition amongst our allies, if you will, because it's so you're a member of Congress, and like, okay, well, I have an extra $1 I can spend on something. And of course, if I show up, I'm gonna say, oh, you should spend it on libraries, because libraries change lives and they help people find jobs and all this stuff, right? But then someone else is gonna go in and say, well, do you know what the payoff on university research is in terms of the economy. And then the cancer researcher is going to go and talk about how important more funding for cancer research is. And then someone else is going to come in and say that, democracy is on the line in Europe. We need to find more money for Ukraine. That's what you need to do with that dollar, right? And there's like all these things that are important. Like, yeah, I want to do all of that, but I only have the dollar, and someone's going to get it. And so, so it is important to reinforce that with your allies. And so I made it to 30 minutes. Here's my contact info. I'm writing a book. So one of the things I'm working on in my spare time is a book on the future directions for public policy and lobbying, because clearly things have changed a lot over the past years. And so, what does that mean in terms of the how of lobbying? And I think there's time for a few questions, maybe.
Yep, we got time for some questions.
You talk a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So today that we see a company called Technology coming out, and they actually will have the new data center come out. And what would be your view on this kind of like a new hypertension kind of like the data centers? So I'm not sure if you are familiar with this. So basically now they use the optics to make the wire, and then to actually to kind of make it way faster than before. So now we are talking about the network for like 800G. And then next year you will be 1.60. And then the coming year will be 6.40 terabytes speed.
So the network speed can be increasing a lot in coming years.
Right, but the problem is the California state we didn't really have the enough electricity to actually to make this kind of the data center to be here. So like the most data center that may be in the Washington State, and I heard like Google they actually planning to have this kind of data center in the DMV area. So which is kind of new, and I'm not sure like how is this like a whole dynamic or the like, landscape shifting is. So since you are from the policy background, so I just kind of wonder like what would be your view?
The advent of a lot more data centers.
Right,
And you'll be able-
and they actually bring from California to the DMV areas. So
And it's coming
like
to the
DC,
DMV.
Maryland, yeah.
I don't know if I have, I don't know a lot about data centers
Right,
and
okay,
such.
sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yep.
And thank you so much for your talk and for all of the years. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about when I was at CDT, we worked closely with ALA and the Freedom to Read Foundation and others, watching all the things that are happening with campuses, Jimmy Kimmel, with libraries and books. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the coalitions that are being built, where you see opportunities. I see a lot of people trying to keep their heads down, which doesn't seem particularly useful from my perspective. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about places where you think people are being bold, where coalitions are working, not just in the courts where I see it, but more in public messaging and kind of resistance and trying to create different narratives.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's Well, I think maybe there's two different issues I might want to say something about. First is about the comment about keeping your head down. And so, I mean, many groups, of course, have been thinking about that in terms of they don't want to be the target. Maybe it's better to like, to do less or to be less visible. But we have more than 3 years of this happening. So that if you're an inherent target, you're going to be a target eventually. So that's not going to work. So I think that was my conclusion. And it's one reason why ALA sued the Trump administration that it's ALA is already a target. So there's no use hiding. And so doing something blatantly illegal, so you have to call them out on it. And you take your best shot in federal court. You're right, in terms of coalitions, there is one called, for example, United Against Book Bans, which is a coalition of libraries and various public interest groups and publishers and authors. So like the Association of American Publishers and the Authors Guild and big publishers like Penguin Random House are part of it, as well as ALA and quite a few of the, I guess, First Amendment advocacy groups are part of it too. And so, trying to do what we can to help out, to increase visibility, and also to take action. I think, as you know, a lot of that work is also at the state level. So there have been a number of court cases there, or even legislation. And so I think trying to hide is not the solution, and that things can happen. And also, there is also merit to trying to do things a little bit more quietly too, because there's what you see on television on the headlines, but then there's also the group of folks who are not with what's happening in the proposal, but they're not wanting to be public about it, right? Even though they're in the next Republican Party. And so if you work with them quietly, they might actually work with you, but they can't be so public about it. And so that kind of strategy has worked in one state where a bill got to a committee, and then one of the key legislators, a Republican, wasn't willing to be public about opposing it, but he was willing to help stall as much as possible. And ultimately, that's what happened. That the legislative session ended, and therefore the bill died. And so there are different ways of trying to approach things, and just kind of the direct frontal advocacy approach.
One more question.
Thank you so much again for all of the work that you've done throughout the decades. Can you comment on anything that's happening as funding is coming back from the federal government? What we find across the country, not just affecting libraries, but municipal agencies everywhere, is the requirement to eliminate any EDI from any of the funding that we receive. I just got an NEA grant. They stipulated America 250, but I know what they mean by America 250. So we're changing that a little bit around so it still is in compliance. And as you say, doing it softly a little bit, but still within the frame of what we want to do from an EDI perspective. But I don't know if you have any comment on that. Tariffs are attacking all of our library and materials in terms of international language acquisition. Anyway, I just wanted to see if you had any comments about that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a hard one, because at least for the first months, we've been, quote, lucky, if you will, because a lot of things which were happening were just blatantly illegal, like IMLS closure, attempted closure. It's like, this is obviously illegal. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't need the day necessarily, but it does get you a certain distance. But some of them are being more careful now. And there is, of course, fairly wide discretion in terms of what the president or the administration wants to prioritize in terms of policy. And so that they do have, they are generally able to do that. I mean, each law, each agencies and their authorization and appropriation language varies. It depends on that particular program. But in general, they do have some discretion. And so they don't generally need to fund a DEI kind of program unless there's a law that says specifically that's what Congress is giving us money to do that. And then it's supposed to. So it's difficult. I mean, I think the quiet approach is one of the best ways. Is that because some of the program officers will not necessarily be in agreement with this approach. And so it's like, well, Hany, you can't call it an equity program, but you can call it an awareness program for everyone. But you can do exactly more or less the same thing. And we think it's great. But you can't call it that, you can't use that word because then when it goes up the chain, they're gonna overrule it. And it's really unfortunate, that's the way it is, but that's the way it is. And I'm afraid we just have to deal with it and do the best we can in the current situation. So it's, lobbying is the art of the possible, right? So it's the, it should be this way, but we can't get there. So we're not going to get there. And so we can get here. That's not great, but it's better than being here and having nothing. So we're going to take this now and we keep working on, on getting more.
Great, thank you so much.
I've already introduced Hany, so you're up.
Eric. Welcome everybody to South or back to South. Sorry about the heat. We're on that time of day where, all right. So I don't think I have any better news for you. It's just gonna get worse, honestly. So I think one of the amazing, you said it in your talk, that we were very hopeful in the early days of the internet because we thought the internet would democratize access to democracy and information. And I think what we didn't understand is that it didn't distinguish between good information and bad information, and arguably because of the business model favors bad information. And if you ask anybody back then, I don't think anybody saw this coming. And okay, I didn't see it coming. Somebody else did. But things have gotten super weird on the internet. By the way, if you take nothing else away from the next 30 minutes, take this away, the images with sharks are always fake. Thing, weird, but they're all fake. So I have been thinking for 25 years about digital evidence. I mean, even when we lived in the analog days, we were thinking about evidence, visual evidence. And a lot has changed. Of course, we've gone from an analog to a digital world, and now we've gone from a digital to an AI world, which has really exaggerated a lot of the issues. So let's just take a short history lesson here. This is the best part of my job, by the way. The visual record was always, go back to 1930. Stalin famously airbrushed people out of photos. In fact, go through the historical record, 1930, 1940, 1950, lots and lots of fake images from the Civil War, from Stalin, from name your favorite dictator. They tried to manipulate photographs to change the historical record. So it's not a fundamentally new problem, but of course, when they were doing it, there's a handful of people in the world that could do this. You had to have a dark room, you had to have specialized equipment. It was incredibly difficult. They're literally painting negatives in a dark room. 1982 is sort of where we started the very early days of digital revolution. And I love this cover of the National Geographic because National Geographic got a lot of grief because they took a photo of the pyramids in Egypt, of course. And because of that aspect ratio of the cover of National Geographic, they nudged the Great Pyramid in the back there over a little bit so it would fit. Which today you think, well, who cares? I'm an Egyptian, by the way, so I was particularly offended by somebody the pyramids, but there was people lost their marbles. There were op-eds after op-eds after op-eds talking about this, which by today's standards, no, we wouldn't even think about it. But it was a sign of things to come because we started moving from an analog to digital world. And by 2000, the tools were much more powerful. You can make images like that. You can composite two people together. And by 2015, we made this image of then Vice President Biden painting his Camaro. Things were getting even more sophisticated. You could do more sophisticated manipulations. And somewhere around here between 2000 and 2010, I think we sort of had a handle on the problem. We had started developing techniques, which I'm going to talk to you about, on how you can authenticate digital images. You know, the internet wasn't the internet we have today, so the spread of these type of lies was relatively controlled. But then things started getting out of control, starting around 2015 to today. So I think everybody now knows that generative AI can generate whole cloth images, audios, and videos from nothing more than a keyboard. You don't need a camera, you don't need Photoshop, you don't need skill, you just need a keyboard, and that's it. And so in 2023, this amazing image of the Pope went online and sort of broke the internet. And I think it broke it for a couple of reasons. It was the first image when you looked at it, you thought, that's real. And there were mainstream media outlets that published that image. And people got very scared all of a sudden. We suddenly realized that our eyes are not trustworthy anymore. And as of this year, you can now do not just images.
I am a puppet for anyone who can afford me.
How will you know who to trust?
Boomers will believe anything I say.
I will sell you everything.
Every business will use me. Evil will abuse me.
I can be whoever you want me to be.
I am as real as you make me.
I'm just words some guy is typing to get a point across.
The old internet is dead. Oh!
I am your new best friend.
That's what my inner voice feels like. That entire thing is made of nothing other than text prompts. Yeah. Full-blown audio, video, and a keyboard. It's amazing. And this is commercially available. Anybody can do this, right? And so a lot has changed from the 1930s and that 100 years. And not only can we now manipulate and alter reality, we can carpet bomb the internet because of social media and the digital lives that we live. And you can pollute the minds of 8 billion people in the world instantaneously. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. So lots of cool things you can do with what we call deepfakes, generative AI, but lots of really, really, really bad things that are not hypothetical, but they are actually happening. So in fact, the term deepfake comes from the creation of non-consensual sexual intimate imagery, rather, where people take the likenesses primarily of women, insert them into explicit material, and then use it to extort, embarrass, whatever. And that's not just the Scarlett Johanssons of the world. That's anybody. It's teachers, it's students, it's professors, it's lawyers, it's politicians, it's anybody. The creation of child sexual abuse material is horrific. People are taking images of young children, inserting them into material, and then extorting them. And these kids are taking their own lives because they feel trapped. They don't know what. Disinformation campaigns that we've been dealing with for the last 20 years on steroids now, because it's not just somebody lying on the internet, it's somebody lying with footage, with video of this event happening. And that's really, really compelling. I started thinking about digital forensics because of the courts of law. How do you bring evidence into a court of law? Civil, criminal, national security, everything has a digital component, everything. And so how do we authenticate evidence in a court of law where the stakes are very, very high? Political campaigns, don't get me started with the stupidity of political campaigns around the world with deepfakes. National security concerns, massive fraud, from small scale fraud, people getting phone calls, what they think is their loved ones, and it's not, and they're being defrauded by thousands of dollars. Large scale frauds, enterprise companies losing tens of millions of dollars because they get on a call with who they think is their CEO, and it's not, and they are transferring tens, 20s of millions of dollars. Fraud is happening up and down the scale. And by the way, when fraud happens in enterprise, we all pay the tax. They don't pay the tax, we pay the tax downstream. Here's the big one, and none of these bother you, and I actually think they should. Here's the big one, which is what we call the liar's dividend. which is that when you live in a world where anything can be fake, nothing has to be real. You can deny reality. So when the video or image of Donald Trump on Epstein's island comes out, it's fake. I don't have to cop to it. I don't have to own it. So suddenly nobody has to be responsible for anything. And that's a terrifying world. So our whole sense of reality is now shaken. I just saw somebody just put their hand on their head like, I'm so sorry. I know. Okay, it's gonna get worse, so hold on. So we're in the business of trying to figure out what's real and what's not. And we do this every day for media outlets, for big tech companies, for governments, for law enforcement. And there's been this tendency to think, well, you don't really need the science and mathematics for this because I can just look at these things and I can tell. And it's a fair question. So we actually do perceptual studies. So this is a conceptual study that Sophie Nightingale, who was a former postdoc in my lab, did, where we recruit hundreds and hundreds of people online, and we show them images like these over here. The top row and the bottom row are two different types of AI-generated faces. The middle row is all real. They saw half the images they saw were real, half were fake. And this is their accuracy, 60%, 65%, 48%. If they guessed, they were at 50%. They're slightly better than chance, but not nearly reliable enough, particularly when you're doom scrolling on your phone, to do this reliably. Images have passed through the uncanny valley. They are almost indistinguishable from reality based only on your visual system. Okay. Voices are not that different. So this was a study that Sarah Barrington did. She's a PhD student in my lab right now, where she had people listen to real voices and AI-generated voices, which were cloned from about 30 to 50 seconds of their voice. Each dot here corresponds to a participant. The task chance performance is again 50%, and you can see that accuracy is somewhere between 60 and 70%. So not quite at chance, but very, very close. And note that accuracy will keep going down, 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 down. So when you get that phone call in the middle of the night, and you think it's your granddaughter, or your grandson, or your son or daughter, you will not be able to tell. That's sort of the reality that we live in. And by the way, this is the best possible situation. So we told them that half the things will be real and half will be fake. Now imagine you're just on a Zoom call or a Teams call, or you're on a phone call. Who's thinking, is this person a real person or not? So your auditory and visual system is incredibly limited and getting worse and worse and worse at the task because the technology is getting better and better and better. All right, so that's the bad news. The good news is we're starting to do something about it from the mathematical side. Right? So I want to just spend a little time telling you how we authenticate content, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what's to come in the future. So every case we work on is a little bit different. It's an image, is it a video, is it an audio, how long is it in English, is it in Russian? Just before I came here, I was dealing with something coming out of Russia. It's a disinformation campaign that's spreading online. Everything's a little bit different. But one thing that is common of any image or video that you record is the laws of physics of the physical world have to be respected. And what you should know about generative AI is that it is not mimicking the physical world. It is a statistical inference engine. It is drawing from a probability distribution to generate an image or an audio that is statistically similar to the physical world, but not exactly the same. And it often makes really, really interesting mistakes that your visual system and auditory system don't notice or don't care about, because we didn't evolve to do that. So here's one of my favorite ones. Here's a very simple scene where you have a cone, a ground plane, this hemisphere, and a light source, which is that white dot over there. And that light source is, of course, casting a shadow. And if you imagine sitting in this three-dimensional world, imagine it was right in front of me, and taking a string and connecting it to the tip of the shadow, and drawing it out to the tip of the cone, and keep going, where will you land? The light source. It's the very definition of a shadow. So just above, I'm outer shadow, and just below, I'm in shadow. So that's a physical constraint. Go outside, by the way. I do this all the time because I love shadow. Just stand outside and look at your shadow and ask yourself, where is the sun? Just boop. And then that's where it is. Right? It's pretty simple geometry. There's nothing complicated. Straight line. Now, that's a straight line out in the physical world. But when I take an image, straight lines in the world map to straight lines in the image. Of course, that's why we get images that look like the physical world. So in the image, there's a constraint that will tell me where is a light source for one or more shadows in an image. And then when we get an image like this is a fake image based on a case that we worked on, but this is not the actual image, which I can't share with you. It shows four men being held hostage in a dingy basement, there's the light source right there in the middle. And what I've done here is drawn connections between points on shadows from their legs and their objects. And what you can see is that, in fact, they don't converge. In fact, this one out here is, I don't know where this one came from. It's like not like hollow. Right? So when you get that failure of an intersection of a coherent light source, well, one of two things is possible. There's multiple light sources, which doesn't seem to be the case here, or the physics are simply wrong. And that's good news for us because you wouldn't notice that. You wouldn't look at those shadows and be like, something's wrong. But we can make these measurements and then say something is physically implausible here. Good news. Okay. Technique number one. Oops. Technique number two. This is one of my favorite ones. This is a photo I took standing on the railroad tracks, which now that I think about it, seems sort of dumb. So if you look at these railroad tracks, you'll notice that they are converging as they go away from me. They recede. But obviously in the physical world, the railroad tracks are parallel to each other. Right? So this is perspective projections. Painters have known about this for hundreds of years. Right? If you want to give a sense of to the viewer of depth, things get smaller as they move away from you. And that's just a standard geometric constraint of perspective projection. Okay? But what we know is that if I draw a line along these railroad tracks, they will converge to a single point, vanishing point. You ever taken a drawing class? You've done 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective. It's how you draw things in 3D that are physically correct. Okay? And again, because generative AI doesn't know about the physics and the geometry of the physical world, when you draw these lines on a real photo on the left here, they converge to a vanishing point. But on an AI-generated image along the wall here, you can see that same mess. And what's really cool about this image is if you look at it, it's sort of right? The hallway is receding away from you. It has that sense of depth, but it's not physically correct. It's close, but not right. And you don't notice it. We've done perceptual studies on this. You will not notice inconsistencies in vanishing points. In fact, artists have been playing with vanishing points for a long time and getting away with it because we don't notice. Okay, technique number two. Here's my favorite technique. Okay, so I like this technique because it allows me to explain to you how generative AI works. All right, so this is the cartoon version of it, but it's pretty close to basically how it works. So here's how is it that you can go over to an OpenAI or an Anthropic and type a caption and it generates an image for you that is semantically consistent. I mean, it seems like black magic. I do this for a living and it still seems like magic to me. So here's how it works. Here's how the models were trained. They took billions and billions of images, which by the way, the vast majority of them were stolen, and don't get me started on what the AI community has done in terms of stealing copyright information. That's a whole nother talk. Billions and billions of images with captions from the internet, social media, news outlets, books, anything. So a caption like a black Labrador wearing a purple bandana, et cetera, et cetera. And they take that image and they degrade it with what's called additive noise until nothing is left but random pixels. And it does that iteratively left to right. And then what it does, it says, okay, learn how to go from that, the random noise, back to the original image, which I know what it is because I started with the image and I corrupted it, conditioned on that caption. Okay. And it does that like 5 billion times. And now think about what it's learned how to do. It's learned how to take a random noise image with a caption and generate something that is semantically consistent. It's a denoiser, which we've, by the way, known about for 50 years, but we can do this computationally incredibly efficient thanks to GPUs and massive data that we've stolen. And that's it. That's basically how it works. It's really cool. And under the hood, there's lots and lots of really hard and interesting details. Now, if you look at this AI-generated image with that caption and that real image that I took, something is very different between those two images. So the image on this one was generated with the technique that I just described to you, right? It's basically a denoising algorithm. This thing was taken with an actual camera, right? With a sensor in a physical world. And it has patterns of noise that are due to the quality of the sensor, how hot it is outside, how old the sensor is, ISO settings, aperture settings, lots of things dictate what the pattern of noise in the image will look like. And it is not the same noise as you get here. You can't see it, by the way. It's completely invisible to you. But we can. So we can denoise these images. We take the two images and we extract what's called the residual noise. And there they are. And they It looks completely boring, can't see anything. But we can look at a different visualization of that, which is this, for the mathematicians in the crowd, this is the magnitude of the Fourier transform of the residual noise. For everybody else, that doesn't matter. All that matters is that that's a representation of the underlying noise in the AI generated image and in the real image, natural image. And you see something radically different. Those little stars there emerge, and we actually know exactly why they emerge. We can actually look at the diffusion process that is being used to generate the image. I'm not going to get into what it is, but we know why algorithmically it introduces those patterns. So we can take images like this, we can denoise them, we can look at the magnitude of the Fourier transform, and when we see that pattern right there or something like that, we can flag the image as likely to be AI generated. So those are three of many, many techniques. At least half of you in the audience are now thinking, this guy is a complete idiot because he's just told me 3 techniques that he uses to analyze images, and I'm simply going to now train my AI to get around. Perfectly valid perspective to have. Hold that thought, and I'll address it at the very end. Okay, so let's talk about videos and audio for a little bit, how we detect these. So this is Mayor Khan of London. I'm using this example for a couple of reasons. It's got a British accent, and I want to show you how you can clone voices with accents. And somebody created a fake audio of him, and it led to riots in the streets of London to show you that these things have consequences. This isn't fun and games. Like, bad stuff is happening around the world. So let me first have you just listen to Mayor Khan so you can see what his voice sounds like.
But I think this takes the biscuit. It's just such bad taste. It just reminds everyone.
Yeah. Is Gary on? Gary, if you're on the call, if you can turn up the volume, that'd be great. And if not, don't worry about it. All right, so that was Mayor Khan. So I took about a minute of Mayor Khan's voice. I uploaded it to a service I paid $5 a month for. And I said, clone this voice for me. And it said, do you have permission to use his voice? And I said, yes. Even though so, you know, that's on me, I suppose. And then it cloned his voice, and then I just typed and had him say anything I want. So go ahead and have a listen.
I am told that on the issue of deepfakes, one of the world's leading experts is Professor Hany Farid.
Okay, so pretty good, by the way. I mean, sounds natural. It's got the British accent. I mean, it's really good. I can tell you, I actually was in London and I played this for Mayor Khan, and he couldn't tell the difference. And it's his voice. It's pretty good. Okay, so we can clone people's voice. This is a solved problem. Yes, please.
I thought the clone voice had a little more edge to it than the natural voice.
It's a really good point. If you look at those perceptual studies that I showed you, we're not a chance. I generated this audio about 2 years ago. It's gotten a lot better. The cadence has gotten a little bit better, and so I'm going to redo this, and then come see me at our and I'll tell you how we did. Okay. All right. So not only can I clone his voice, but I can now put his voice back into his video. Okay, so have a look at this.
Told that on the issue of deepfakes, one of the world's leading experts is Professor Hany Farid. Having spent some time with him, however, I can tell you that he is a bit of a dipshit.
I have these 2 students who have gotten everybody that is anybody to call me a dipshit, and it's amazing. You saw the mouth quivering? Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't perfect. This was made about 2 years ago. That problem is actually solved now. It's over. Really, really good. And so we've been really worried about these types of videos because what people do is they'll take, this is an actual interview that Mayor Khan gave. It was about a 30-second interview. They ripped the voice out, they cloned it, they had him say whatever they wanted, they put it back in, and now you have a video of him saying anything you want. It's really scary. And we see this every day. Every day we get a video from AP, Reuters, Agence France, CNN, somebody saying, is this politician, CEO, famous person actually saying these things every day? And this is what we call lip sync deepfake. And it's very powerful. And the technology is completely commercialized now. You can just go to any of half a dozen services and just do this. Push a button that says you have permission to do it and do whatever you want. So this is one of my favorite techniques that Manny Bohachik, who's a student at Stanford, developed a few years back, and it still really works really well. So here's the basic idea. And you could sort of see it with the mouth moving, like something was a little off. And I use this video because I wanted you to see that, but honestly, we can now make these where they're indistinguishable. So what we do is we take the video and we split it into a video and an audio track. And the audio track, this gets transcribed. This is completely solved problem, right? I mean, any AI can now transcribe audio to go from audio to text. So this was Sarah, a PhD student in my lab, saying, I just think it's a really feel-good and excellent piece of cinema. She was asking a question about her favorite movie. So we've got a transcription of what her audio is saying, the voice. And then we take the video and we read her lips. Completely computationally. We ignore the audio and we say, what is her mouth saying? What phonemes are being spoken? And here, her mouth is saying, I just had its bread roll. It's your presence about the media in a way. Completely unrelated. And by the way, it didn't look that bad when you saw the video, right? And the reason is, if you've ever seen the puppets on Sesame Street, and the puppet's mouth just sort of moves like this, and it looks fine.
Yeah.
Right? So the visual system is very forgiving of that synchronization. And part of the reason is we do what's called multisensory integration. And we tend to favor the more dominant signal. And in this case with a puppet, this is a dominant signal. And so we allow, our brain allows it to get synchronized for us. Okay. So we have a very simple technique where we take the audio and transcribe it, we take the video and transcribe it, and we just compute the distance between them. It's called the normalized Levinstein distance. And in the yellow and the red here is, the blue is the authentic, which means the distance between the transcriptions is very small. They agree with each other, which by the way means we can read lips and videos, which is really cool. That's really cool. And these are larger distances for two different types of deep fakes. And you can see that they just spread apart very, very nicely. I'm going to skip this slide. And so when we run this on Mayor Khan, the audio says, I'm told on the issue of deepfakes, one of the blah, blah, blah. And the mouth is saying, I'm shocked that there are only 2 of GPS, which are worse in that case because and it's just a complete mess, right? And so we can now take a video of somebody talking, transcribe, lip read, are they synchronized or not? And even as the videos have gotten very good and you can't see that little quivering, there are still inconsistencies that we can detect. Really, really good. Now, how long will that work? How effective will it be? Don't know. So that gets me to this question. So I just enumerated 4 different techniques. And the question you got to ask yourself is, isn't the AI just going to make better fakes based on this? And it's the right question to ask. So a couple of answers to that question. So one is, I'm not, after all, an idiot. And so we have developed techniques that we don't talk about publicly. So we have techniques that we just don't talk about, so that they are more likely to have legs and to be effective, for months and years to come. So that's number one, although security obfuscation is not really the best strategy. Number 2 is that the way we should always think about cybersecurity is not an elimination strategy, but a mitigation strategy. We are in the business of mitigating the threat from cyber criminals. And if I make it so that it's more time consuming and more difficult and more costly and riskier and requires more skill and so on and so forth, I go from the average knucklehead on the internet being able to disrupt a national election to a state-sponsored actor has to do it. That's a threat I can deal with, right? But I can't deal with billions of people in the world being able to create content and completely change the outcome of an election. So what we're trying to do is simply raise the bar, okay? And by adding in these forensic techniques, we raise the bar. The average person can't just go to some OpenAI tool, use it, and then get away with it. They're gonna have to do a lot more. That was number 2. Number 3 is what I said earlier, which is that fundamentally, generative AI is a statistical inference engine. It actually doesn't know about the physical world. It doesn't know about optics. It doesn't know about sensors. It doesn't know about geometry. It doesn't know about anything. And honestly, it's amazing that it works as well as it does, given that it doesn't understand the physical world. It's only learned characteristics of the physical world by looking at so much data, whether it's text, images, audio, or video. And so getting the physics right is just not inflating. But the other thing too is, say what you will about OpenAI, and I can say a lot, and Midjourney and Anthropic and all these companies, they're not actually our adversary. They're not trying to make images and video that are indistinguishable from reality forensically. Right? They're not like cyber criminals who are trying to create malware and spam, right? And things that will hurt you. OpenAI is not trying to hurt us. They are, but that's not what they're trying to do. Right? And so we have some hope that they're not going to go out and say, oh, Hany Farid at UC Berkeley in his lab have generated all these techniques. Let's make sure we can break them. That's not what they're doing. And frankly, they're not motivated. Because as long as you look at these images and you like them, they don't care if they're physically correct. They couldn't care less, right? So I think there's some hope here, but every technique that I've enumerated will have a shelf life. If we're lucky, we get a couple years out of it, and then the techniques just, bypass it, and then we develop more techniques, right? And then we just keep going. That's the arms race of cybersecurity. Everything in cybersecurity is like this. Somebody asked me the other day, why do you work on these problems? You're just going to lose. And I said, when you left your house today, did you lock your front door? And he said, yes. And I said, well, then shut the hell up. Because I could say the same thing to you. Like, why lock the front door? Somebody's simply going to batter it down or pick the lock. We do things that are reasonable because it stops 99% of the problems, right? And then we deal with the 1% of the problems with other things, right? So that's sort of the model we have to have. Okay. Sarah Barrington is an amazing PhD student in my lab right now. Maddie Bohachik wanted to be an undergraduate student here, but UC Berkeley didn't accept him, so he went to Stanford. He still works with me. He didn't forgive Berkeley, but he forgave me. I was not in prison, don't worry, Eric. This is Sylvie Nightingale, who's now a professor in the UK and was a postdoc in my lab. And lots of papers and interviews and talks are on my website, which is farid.berkeley.edu. And I made this image way before Disney did that stupid thing with Jimmy Kimmel, but now I'm really glad I made it. This is an image. I love this image for so many reasons. The prompt on this was Mickey Mouse drop kicking a kid across Disneyland, which, that's pretty good. And it's Mickey Mouse. They let me make an image of Mickey Mouse.
Wow.
By the way, I have to tell you, this is a couple months ago. I was down at Disney giving this talk, and I used this image. And I didn't realize how seriously Disney takes Mickey Mouse. They did not. I swear to God, they would have put me in jail if they could. I thought it was really funny, but I was the only one who thought it was funny. Okay, I'm gonna stop there and I'm happy to take some questions. Thanks.
How do they address embedded metadata? Do they fake the metadata too?
Good. So the question is about metadata. Let me explain what metadata is first. So metadata is information about an image or video or audio that is embedded in the file. So if I pick up my phone right now and take a photo, it has lots and lots of metadata. Where am I? When was I there? What's the camera? What's the optical settings? All of that stuff. Yeah. So when you have an image coming off of this, lots of rich metadata that tell you a phenomenal amount of forensic information. Okay. Now, if I took that image and I uploaded it to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything, all that metadata gets ripped out. It gets saved by them for data issues, but we don't get to see it. So for OpenAI, Midjourney, Anthropic, they don't put, there's a footnote to what I'm about to say, but they don't put metadata in it. Okay? But that's not in and of itself a warning because most of the images on the internet don't have metadata. Now, there is something that OpenAI has started to do, and some of the other companies are starting to do, which is what's called content credentials. So content credentials is a type of metadata that is signed by the company, cryptographically signed. So if you go over to OpenAI right now and you use their engine to generate an image, it will have what's called a content credential in the metadata that says OpenAI made this, and here's the cryptographic signature to prove that we did it. It's called the C2PA, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication. Google inserts invisible watermarks into their content, which is a gift for us. So there's some movements to sign this content because it's not saying that it's good or bad. It's sort of like when you go to the grocery store and you get a label on the food. You can buy potato chips all you want, and we're just going to tell you that they're bad for you. And so this is sort of the same thing. So there's a movement, but we haven't gotten all the companies to do it, and the adversaries certainly won't do it. And of course, you're always able to rip that metadata out or replace it. So I think it's part of the solution, but it's the sort of the bottom 10%, if you will. Yeah. Somebody had their hand up.
I had a same question about what for content creators, how can we prevent that?
Yeah.
Watermarking or doing something.
Yeah. Okay. So the question was for content creators, how can we prevent it? The short answer is you can't. You're going to get screwed. I mean, that's the short answer. The longer answer is you can do things like add adversarial noise that pollutes the models, but that's short-lived also if you're going to find a way around. You can add do not train metadata, but not everybody's going to, so honestly, if you want to be on the internet, your content's going to be stolen. Now, I think this stuff is going to get adjudicated. If you go back to the late 90s, early 90s, we were all stealing movies and music and books, and everybody thought, well, this is just the way it has to be. And it turned out it didn't, right? We created an ecosystem. I mean, by the way, content creators still get screwed. But there's a mechanism where you can now buy books and buy music, and it works reasonably well. I think we're gonna do something similar with this kind of data. We need data brokers. And then you get to say, hey, look, if you want this, you have to pay me this fraction. And how we do that and organize, but I think we're gonna have to get there because of the sort of how valuable this data is. Yeah, sorry.
Players dividend, that's something I noticed in new over the last 3 weeks. I think that's Epstein.
Yeah.
Which is that I'm seeing a lot of video being distributed, people showing how gullible Americans are when it comes to fake audio and video.
Yeah.
Like people are being, they're showing a test group and they're playing them fake audio of Donald Trump saying, I want cameras in the dressing room. And then they show how well the people who are Trump voters say, well, that's understandable. He's concerned about security.
Yeah.
And people who don't like Trump are saying, you see, that just shows you who Trump is.
Yeah.
The point of the video is to not have confidence in recordings of Trump.
Yeah. And it works. You don't actually have to make convincing fakes. You just have to create noise in the system. Right? Doubt is a winning strategy when it comes to this. And you see the administration and state-sponsored actors doing that. You don't have to really get people to believe all your lies. You just have to get them to question everything. You question media, you question scientific experts, you question the government, and now you've destabilized an entire country. And I do think that is what's happening. We have lost our shared sense of reality. I'm saying 2 + 2 is 4. The other side is saying, no, it's not, it's applesauce. I mean, that's the tenor of the conversation. And that is very dangerous for sort of where we are. Deirdre.
Well, you talked about all the people who are calling you and sending you stuff. And one of the things that on the policy side I've been interested in is distributed cognitive defense. Like, could we take the approaches that you were using and build them into my phone so that I could actually be like, oh, the perspective is all wrong, which my husband, the photographer, is really good at.
Yeah.
I gotta say, like, could we make that something that is distributed?
Yeah. So the
Not everybody can.
yeah. So Deirdre's question is, can we basically put this on the phone so anybody can, anything they look at, tell them what is what? I don't know, but what I'm worried about is it won't work for the following reason. Because I think there are, let's say 40% of Americans don't want to be lied to and do sort of want to know what's what. But I think the vast majority of Americans, and this is by the way not partisan, this is on both sides of the political spectrum, sort of want to be lied to. So I'll give you an example of this. I get emails, voicemails, everything all day long from all kinds of people around the world. Analyze this, and I try to respond because I do think it's important for us to engage. And so if it's somebody who is pro-Trump, pro-MAGA, and there's a piece of content that is damaging to Trump and I debunk it, I'm a genius. If it's something that is damaging to Trump and I say, no, it's real, I'm a left-leaning socialist communist Berkeley professor. Right? The problem is people don't really want the right answer from me. I can't tell you how many times people ask me, you're a world's leading expert, you should analyze this. And I respond, they're like, you're an idiot. I'm like, oh, you wrote to me, man. I mean, this is the problem, Deirdre.
But don't you think that's the political, like when it's somebody trying to game me out of my money, I think people are a little bit more interested in the truth.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm concerned that we have gotten to the talk that just was earlier. We've gotten so polarized that we just distrust everybody. You're a Berkeley professor? No, I can't trust you. Doesn't matter whether I'm trying to help you or not. So I don't know. I mean, I think there are technical limitations of doing things on the phone too. Just computationally, these things are fairly intensive. But I mean, honestly, I think the fact checks are necessary, but I don't think they're sufficient. I don't think they get us to sort of where we need to be because we've eroded so much trust. I mean, I have people who accuse me of being a time traveler. This is what I'm doing. Which, by the way, is really cool. Cool. I know, right? I know. I've got one person, which is so weird. That's
I hardly ever hear this talk about like the judicial system, like court cases. I'm
Yeah.
sure it probably comes up. I just.
okay, good.
And so is that where like forensics folks like you come along and say, hey, this video is real?
Yeah. So the question was, she was saying, I rarely hear about this in the judicial system. It is happening everywhere. So I give lots of talks to judges and lawyers. It is a huge concern to the federal and state courts because they are getting digital evidence and everybody gets to say it's fake. Body camera of a police officer doing something bad, it's fake. All right, now where are we, right? I had a case just a couple of weeks ago. There was a very bitter divorce, and there was a voicemail, a threatening voicemail from one of the partners, and it was fake. And the other side was using it to try to get custody of their kids. This is happening every day, and the courts are really, really struggling to figure out how to hunt it. And there's, I mean, you can count on two hands the number of people like me who do this at this scale. We can't be everywhere. So and the federal rules are nowhere when it comes to digital evidence. They are absolutely lost in space. So I think it's brewing, and I don't have a great answer.
I think we need to wrap up.
Okay, we have to wrap up, sorry. Okay.
Thank you so
I'll be
much.
kicking around.
And now over to the water.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I'm gonna try to lighten things up a little bit. We'll see how good of a job I do. I will say he's already gone. Part of the reason that I agreed to talk today is because I only ever hear Hany on KQED, and so actually getting to hear him in South Hall is kind of a novelty right now. So anyway, bye. It was nice while it lasted. Okay, let's go direction. Great. Okay. So, hello, nice to meet you all. I'm Lauren. I am a fifth-year PhD candidate working with Deirdre Mulligan here at the iSchool, and today I'm going to be sharing the results of kind of my first big PhD research project, which is looking at what I call advocacy technologists, or technologists who are existing in these mission-driven civil society contexts. So I'm going to start out and tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm going to tell you, how did I get to this question? I'm going to tell you, how did we try to answer this question? What did we find? And then why does it matter? So kind of a traditional research talk we've got today. Before I jump into that, just big thanks to Deirdre, of course, as well as the Algorithmic Fairness and Opacity Working Group here at the iSchool, which has been a huge help for this project. I also got a ton of support from the Law School Center for the Study of Law and Society, and then the IRLE, the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment. So thank you to all of those stakeholders. So who am I and why am I talking to you about this? Before I came to grad school, I worked for 2 years as the staff technologist at the Massachusetts ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union, which was a wild time to be there because I was between 2019 and 2021 is when I was there. So like a couple important things happened while I was there. And it was such a unique role to be able to have because I was deeply embedded in this ultimately political organization that was trying to do direct advocacy with lawmakers and executives and the governor and the district attorneys and all that. But I was there to do the data stuff. And so I was able to kind of explore the different ways that data can be so helpful for these deeply social and political causes. So I'm not going to talk a ton about what I did there, but just some examples. Some of the projects that I did helped make critical data more accessible. So we designed and maintained a dashboard that showed the status of COVID inside prisons and jails across the state at the beginning of the pandemic. We also worked to counter false narratives. So one of the projects that I helped with was a mapping project where we were mapping instances of police misconduct, violence, and death across the state, which was a direct campaign to try to counter this idea that blue states, progressive states like Massachusetts, don't have this problem of police violence. And of course, that's not true. And by kind of putting this mapping project together, we're able to provide evidence for the fact that you should also care about this if you live in a blue state. And finally, we were able to reveal government priorities. So I spent a lot of time at the end of my time at the ACLU studying how much money the city of Boston and other entities were spending on policing and doing some kind of really simple comparative analysis, looking at how much are we spending on policing versus libraries or versus arts and science or public health, and just kind of making that data, again, more accessible. And so I don't know that I knew it at the time, but all of this work that I'm undertaking was kind of part of this broader movement that has become more and more important as the decades have passed. This movement that exists at this super broad intersection between all these tech things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data, technology, computation, And then all of these social things. So civil society, a notion of what good or justice or ethics looks like. And different people have different names. There's all sorts of different kind of movements that people have coined. But what I have been focusing on and kind of using as my term of art is public interest technology. And so that is kind of how I understand the work that I did at the ACLU and that the people that I study now are doing is technology in the public interest. So I'm going to take us on a brief kind of historical journey to try to better contextualize where public interest tech is coming from. And Alan actually did a really great job of setting me up for this. So I'm going to talk through the top line is civil society sector, the middle is the public sector or the government, and the bottom is academia or university scholastic work. So you can see, and I'm sorry the text is kind of small here, but in the 2000s and early 90s, we had a lot of initiatives popping up, such as long-standing organizations like the Center for Democracy and Technology or the Electronic Frontier Foundation were hiring permanent staff members who were technologists. We also had, as we heard from Alan, things like the Telecoms Act getting passed under the Federal Communications Commission, or even the Department of Homeland Security forming the National Cybersecurity Division. And we had all of these really exciting academic initiatives popping up at Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Princeton, looking at internet and society, internet policy, all of those things. So this is really awesome. I find this era to kind of be characterized by the fact that it was focusing on the implications of the nascent internet. So all of these initiatives were kind of reacting to this new weird thing called the internet. How do we write policy for the internet? How do we react to it? How do we make sure it's safe? So on and so forth. Now, what's different in the years since is that we've kind of seen a broader application of where we're thinking critically about tech and policy. It's not just about regulating the internet. It's not just about keeping us safe online. We're starting to see that technology has implications for all sorts of policy work, advocacy that people do all over the place. So you can see in the civil society space, we've had completely new organizations come online, like Upturn, Recidiviz, Tech Equity, and the Public Interest Tech University Network. We've also had kind of long-standing organizations lean into and start new projects and departments that focus on technology. So we see New America starting the Open Tech Institute. We see the ACLU opening an analytics team. We see the AFL-CIO founding a tech institute, and also the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights founding kind of a focus on civil rights and technology. We see across the government, we're starting to bring on data officers and AI executives across all of the government. So not just thinking about cybersecurity or communications, but thinking about consumer financial protection or the FTC and trade. And then we start to see also across the academic sector, these, in this case, mostly master's programs that are explicitly looking at the intersection of policy and data. And so I kind of describe this as the new age of advocacy technology, in which we're seeing kind of lean into the ways that tech is relevant, not just for tech, but tech is relevant for everything. And so here are some of the logos of some of those groups that I mentioned and others that I think are really pushing and leading the space in so-called public interest tech or PIT, ranging from the US Digital Corps, which is still hanging on in the federal government, to other sorts of international and national NGOs, nonprofits that are focused on and thinking about the ways that tech is influencing society. So this is all well and good, but I think it's important to realize the stakes of what we're up against. So how many of you saw this headline or this story that dropped over the summer? So for those of you who didn't see it, it was on all of the tech podcasts. Basically, Meta was trying to recruit some fresh AI researchers. They were trying to poach them from other companies. And they made national headlines because they were offering compensation packages in the hundreds of millions. So to be fair, this was over 4 years. But $250 million over 4 years is not bad. Compare this to, let's say, the operating expenses of the Center for Democracy and Technology, which is one of the longest standing, most established, most effective organizations in the public interest tech space. Anyone want to guess how much they think an annual operating budget for CDT might be?
200 million.
200 million? 2 million? Okay, well, we've got a range there. According to their website, in 2024, the answer was less than $10 million. So we're seeing that in the private sector, these companies are able to hire people for an order of magnitude more money than entire organizations are operating in the civil society space, right? So David and Goliath like barely even gets at the dynamic that we're seeing here. So anyway, this is kind of how I came to these questions that I seek to answer with this project. So who are the advocacy technologists that these advocacy groups are bringing on to help them do their work? How and why do they end up in these kinds of roles? And then what does investigating advocacy technologists tell us about the future of and the relationship between advocacy and technology? So I'm going to go through my methods quickly. If you want to read more about the methods, I've included a little URL at the bottom of the screen. I won't spend too much time on this, but basically I talked to 23 different people in semi-structured qualitative interviews. I specifically was recruiting people who, one, worked within an advocacy setting, which usually meant a civil society or nonprofit group, and two, had tech skills or tech expertise that they were using in support of the work they were doing in those organizations. So not necessarily people who were doing IT work or other operations support, but people who were doing strategic work with their technology expertise. And again, this is a little bit small, but I intentionally prioritize talking to people in domains that aren't historically data or tech oriented. So you can see here, this is my table of who I talk to and the modal kind of group that I talk to. Modal kind of person works in digital rights, but I also talk to people working in reproductive rights or basic needs or civil rights or climate. So I was really trying to say, I don't want to just talk to the CDTers and the EFFers. I also want to talk to people at Planned Parenthood or Amnesty International or what have you. I was able to offer them honoraria, thanks again to the Berkeley Institute for Research on Labor and Employment, transcribe those interviews with Zoom, and then use some flexible coding and reflexive thematic analysis methods in order to come to some conclusions. So what did we find? What are those conclusions? I've got two kind of packages of results to share with you today. The first has to do with career pathways and how the individuals that I talked to ended up in the jobs that they found. And the second has to do with what I call patterns of practice. So how are these individuals doing the work that they're doing? How are they succeeding? How are they struggling? And what can we learn from that? So starting out with these pathways, I was ultimately able to identify 3 different kinds of pathways that I saw across this group. The first I call homegrown critical technologists. So these are people who grew up as the internet was growing up, or who were already around as the internet was growing up. And they have spent their entire lives and the entire length of the internet, in some cases, thinking about tech in critical and socio-political ways. So they kind of have been here since the beginning. Then we have the socio-technical converts. So these are individuals who most likely started their careers in the law field or in activism or organizing, and then kind of came to understand and study technology as a result of that work, or sometimes the other way around. So people who were in tech and had come to Jesus and then ended up doing more advocacy and political oriented work. And the last category is what I call socio-technical natives, which is a play on the term digital native, which for those who aren't familiar is a term people use today to talk about people who grew up never knowing a world without the internet or never knowing a world without their iPhones, who are just completely immersed in the digital world. So I'm kind of taking that concept to think about socio-technical natives. So these are people who are pretty young, in their 20s and 30s. They're leaving college often with technical degrees, like in computer science, but they're immediately saying, I don't want to go work for Meta. I don't want to go work for Google. I want to go work and do technical work that is ultimately political. And so this is where I find a lot of hope, is in this truly vastly growing and accelerating population of people who are coming up into the workforce and saying, no, I want to do something different. So those are our career pathways. When it comes to these patterns of praxis, I ultimately was able to identify 4, which I'm going to share with you through various quotes that I got from my interviewees. So forgive me, I probably should have cut them down a little bit, but I just love them so much. So you're gonna get a lot of data today about these 4 patterns and how they kind of arose out of the interviews. So the first pattern is translating. And for each of these, I have kind of 2 sub-patterns that we'll talk about. So when I'm talking about these individuals being translators or translating, I'm talking about the ways that they are able to move back and forth from a goal to an implementation. So for instance, one participant described how they would, quote, serve as a translator in between what someone is asking for and what we can actually build. Or another participant said, they often had to, quote, reiterate the fact that just because the data exists doesn't mean that it's easy to use. So there's a lot of kind of confusion that might exist where someone who's running policy or someone who's running legislation might say, oh, we have this data set. Can we do this with it? Can we solve this problem? And it's these individuals who are serving as translators who might go back and forth and say, no, but we can do this. Does that work? And then maybe we can do something a little bit different. So this kind of back and forth process between technical implementation and sociopolitical goals. The second sub-pattern here I describe as shining light into black boxes. So I think we might all be familiar with the metaphor of a black box for algorithms and these technologies that we see what goes in and we see what comes out, but we don't really understand what happened in the middle. And I had this really long but great quote from someone saying, quote, the tech industry perpetuates this narrative that this stuff is really complicated. People start to question themselves. Maybe I don't really understand this. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. And so I really try to combat that. You do understand it. This is 99% an issue you absolutely understand, and we will explain to you the minuscule tech parts of it. So this is kind of getting at this idea that there's this smoke and mirrors that the tech industry likes to kind of cast over how they talk about their products, how they talk about AI, and having these advocacy technologists on staff gives advocates access to people who can say, again, no, we don't need to, run away and say we don't understand it. You understand it, we can walk you through it. You should be part of this conversation. Okay, the second pattern has to do with interrogating. So one element of this was resisting hype and magical thinking. So one participant said, quote, we've all been duped by these platforms. They're not out to help us foment revolution. They're not out to really help us defend human rights. They're gathering all this data from people. Another said, and this is very familiar, probably to many in the room, quote, there's so much AI fervor. Everyone's like, how do we use AI? Can we do this thing where we predict this thing? And you're like, no, we can't do that. We have no data to do that with. And even if we did do that, it would be stupid. So kind of, you can see the ways that when people are more comfortable with how technical processes work, they're more resistant to the hype train and to these kind of magical ideas that it's just poof, something happens out of nowhere. And so by being able to push back on this, I think it allows these advocacy organizations to have a more critical orientation on these big, new, scary, sometimes tech tools. This also looks like rejecting techno-solutionism, or this idea that we should be turning to technology to solve all of our problems, and instead centering people and centering problems. So one person said, if we're always going for, quote, a new mobile app that's Uber for whatever, or AI for that, that's just a recipe for flushing money down the toilet. And someone else said, quote, organizing comes down to the relationships of the members and leaders and people. And there's just not a lot that tech can really contribute to that. So I think this is kind of fun because you might think that these individuals who are ultimately tech experts would be so gung-ho, like, come on, let's do this. Let's use more technology. But we see that's actually not the case. And they're being very cautious and kind of pumping the brakes and saying, let's make sure that we use it appropriately and don't overestimate what it is possible to do. The third pattern has to do with introspecting. So a lot of the participants showed a really deep dedication to meaningful work. One person was describing someone they know who works at, in this case, they're talking about Facebook, but I don't think it was particularly specific. And this other person that my participant knows would say, quote, "My job is to go in and fight for child safety and to lose. That's my job every day." And then this person is paid out the wazoo, but quote, "I have a very hard time thinking this would be rewarding." And another participant who was a bit younger saying, "Maybe I'm naive, quote, but the thing that I spend a lot of hours a week doing can be aligned with what I want my high level vision to be." So these are people who are choosing their job in deep alignment with their own ethics and their own morals, and wanting those things to be aligned. They're also evaluating their own impact. So one of my participants was very clear that even though they work for a nonprofit, they're not necessarily super into nonprofits as a concept. So this person said, quote, "I listen closely to revolutionary thinkers who critique so-called civil society and the nonprofit industrial complex as a means of defanging revolutionary movements and controlling revolutionary movements through bureaucratic structures. I listened very carefully to that." And then I got this whole complete waterfall of responses where everybody is asking themselves questions, and I need to get closer to see this. What are we doing? Are we just part of the system? What sacrifices are we making by working at a big nonprofit? Is this really ever going to help anyone? I need to go back to school. Are we doing anything here? Are we actually meaningfully making a difference? What is my work actually adding up to and doing in the world? And so everybody is having an existential crisis. I find that very relatable, but I also find that hopeful because that means that these people are not settling in their jobs and they're constantly asking themselves, often even after they have made a switch out of a high-paying tech job into a resource-constrained nonprofit job, and are still saying, how can I do better? How can I do more? And then the last pattern I think is a bit straightforward. It's the ways that these individuals are trailblazers, and they have uncertain paths both behind them and ahead of them. And so one person said, quote, "There wasn't a clear path in front of me for what to do if you like math and don't want to do evil. There's not really a great pipeline from the STEM fields to social good organizations at all." And another person said, quote, "We just don't know where we're going. We don't know what's next for us because there are not paths that are pre-charted. People have not done this before." Which I think we can all kind of understand, right? You can imagine that being a data scientist inside the ACLU could be kind of a weird and lonely experience. And just because it's awesome doesn't mean that it's not also weird and lonely, and that you don't know what comes next, and you kind of don't know how you ended up there in the first place. At least that's how I feel about it. And then the last bit kind of gets at this idea of loneliness and isolation. So one participant was talking about how you can't, quote, "just pop technologists in." It works when, in this case, technologists are part of a broader plan. They have a team structure. They have real direction in terms of how that work fits into other work. Otherwise, they can just feel like an appendage. And then finally, I had a participant who was talking about having to go elsewhere to find mentorship or opportunities for collaboration or professional development that they were, quote, "just not going to find in the workplace." Because if you're the only tech person, you can't go ask anybody to help you fix your bug. You can't go ask anybody what kind of certificate should I be getting. Those are all things you have to go elsewhere to figure out. So those are my two kind of buckets of results. We've got the 3 different kinds of pathways for how people get into this work. And we have these 4 patterns of the ways that this work is taking place. So why does this matter? Here is my main claim for why this matters, and I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to kind of deconstruct it a little bit. So the claim is that these advocacy technologists are choosing to occupy a precarious new niche within advocacy ecosystems that has great potential to impact policy and design outcomes. So that's a long sentence. It's great for an academic paper, but let's break it down. So this first element is about choosing, about choice. And so I would argue that what we're seeing in these individuals and these professionals is that they are rejecting the status quo of what technology has looked like. So I've got headlines here from the past, I think, 10 years-ish, ranging back to the genocide in Myanmar that was exacerbated by Facebook's lack of content moderation. Of course, the ongoing discussions we're having around AI taking on intellectual property from actors and musicians and writers. We have questions about tech companies making military contracts with countries that are actively at war. We have, of course, the ongoing labor dispute that's happening across tech. And then also in more recent times, we've seen companies kind of pull the rug out from under their DEI initiatives. And what I see is that the individuals that I talk to are looking at this and saying, this is not okay. I'm not going to go work for Google just because they can pay me $250 million. I think that it's still worth it for me to do work that feels aligned. And this is not going to be my status quo. So I find that to be very the second element is the way that these individuals and their positions are precarious. So we see that oftentimes the folks that I talk to didn't get a lot of specific training in the work that they're doing. So I think we all know, sitting here where we are, that interdisciplinary programs that allow you to explore both tech questions and society questions are so rare, so few and far between, and that's why the iSchool is so great. But that means that few people get access to these sorts of institutions, and it can be hard for them to get the sorts of training that would easily prepare them to go into these sorts of roles. It's also hard for them to find and stay in jobs. Kind of as I said, they don't know how they got there, they don't know what's coming next. These organizations cannot be competitive in terms of paychecks with companies. And they also can't offer the sorts of mentorship that working at an established tech company can offer. And so this really highlights how important it is for us to have these external professional development organizations and initiatives. So things like Technologists for Public Good, which is a new professional association for public interest technologists that just came up in the past couple of years, are really exciting. And initiatives like the hashtag Black Tech Futures Research Institute are doing really awesome work, kind of bringing people together across workplaces and across domains. I mentioned in that statement how these individuals are filling a niche role in this advocacy ecosystem. So another way I describe that here is a keystone species of sorts. And so here I'm going to kind of read to you some things that various researchers, some from the iSchool themselves, have said over the past years about what would we want? What do we need going forward? This is quotes from kind of the future work sections of these papers. So Deirdre and Ken Bamberger said in their piece in 2018, the importance of having, quote, in-house technical capacity to rectify the uneven technological expertise among stakeholders. Chris Bopp, in his paper about how data can be disempowering in 2017, described how important it was to find experts who can, quote, help individuals and organizations work around imperfect and incomplete data. Steve Jackson in 2014, in his paper about the socio-technical gap, described how important it was to have people who can recognize, quote, the potentially creative and generative interplay of design, practice, and policy. And then Philip Ager, all the way back in 1997, was describing this kind of mythical person who had, quote, one foot planted in the craft work of design and the other foot planted in the reflexive work of critique. And I'll stop there, but you can imagine that there are more papers that have been saying for decades, we need interdisciplinary people, we need boundary crossers. And I argue that the sorts of people that I'm talking to are those people and are able to do this sort of work that rectifies uneven expertise, that has feet planted in different disciplines and can kind of connect those things. And then the last element has to do with these policy and design impacts. So I see this going kind of in multiple directions. We have the ways that bringing tech expertise in can affect advocacy. So we see how having computational literacy and having individuals who understand this, quote, new kind of writing and reading that looks like data and software can help advocates be more effective, can help them even implement the policies that are actually on the books. So if you have access to these really powerful technical tools, then maybe you can help the policy that people thought was a good idea but don't really know how to do, you can do that. And you can also respond to new elements of longstanding advocacy issues. So if you've been working in housing, today you need to understand how algorithmic decision systems are affecting who gets approved for rental applications or for home loans. And if you work in reproductive justice today, you need to understand how data privacy is working and how people's information and, for instance, menstrual tracking apps might be being compromised. So you cannot really exist as an advocate today without having this kind of technical expertise. And these kinds of individuals bring exactly that kind of expertise. And then in terms of how the advocacy can shape the technology in kind of the opposite direction, we see the ways that bringing these critical voices and expertise and this understanding of politics into the space can kind of narrow what Ackerman calls the socio-technical gap between what we can imagine in technology and what we can actually do in the real world. And then finally, I see this as a really exciting sign that advocacy organizations on their own can be a rich site for technical design in and of itself. We don't have to go to the companies to get innovative new tools. We can see that those are coming out of these civil society spaces as well. So what are the implications for research here? I have just 3 more points, which is that I think this helps us understand how important it is to redesign our academic initiatives. Having academic projects that allow us to really prioritize practice and policy contributions and not just something being newly theoretical or novel is so important for being able to continue work like this. Also, exploring tech beyond the private sector. So there's been a ton of work that's been done at the iSchool, at other iSchools across HCI that's studying individuals inside the tech sector, inside private tech companies. And the findings that we get there don't necessarily translate to the people who are working in these nonprofits because it's a completely different context. And so we really need to better explore and understand these technologists that are operating in a different sector. And then, of course, I think this research suggests how important it is to partner with advocates and policy experts as researchers to make sure that we're foregrounding policy and impact and doing research that's actually actionable, not just research that we think will be actionable, which I know can be sometimes difficult. So that's what I have to share. If anyone is curious, I'm in my 5th year, so I'm working towards that D word, the dissertation. So some of the other projects I'm looking at are thinking about the specific work activities that these individuals are doing, thinking about how we can prepare students in class to go into these sorts of roles, and also thinking kind of more infrastructurally around how this work is funded and supported across philanthropy and the public sector in general. So that's what I have. I'm excited for questions if we have time.
Maybe 2 more questions?
Yeah, sure.
No, thank you.
So you, one of the slide that you mentioned about the shape of AI ops. And you want to tell me more about what does that do?
I kind of want to throw that question to Deirdre, if that's okay. The question is about chief AI officers and what they're doing within the government. For those who don't know, Deirdre was at the White House for a year and a half and maybe helped write the order that made chief AI officers a thing in the first place. So she's much better to talk about it.
So the chief AI officers were made responsible for the implementation of the guidance that the Office of Management and Budget issued to all agencies about responsible use of AI, as well as informing procurement decisions. And so they were the responsible party, having to oversee the implementation of all the policies, having to clear all the use cases, clear exceptions for use cases. There was a Chief AI Officers Council that we ran out of the White House that convened, that was led by one of my deputies, as well as the Chief Information Officer for the federal government, that tried to build capacity, build some tools and methodologies to support the Chief AI Officers in that work. The administration, current administration, issued their own guidance. They actually maintained most of the structure of the guidance that we issued during the Biden-Harris administration. I think that much of the technical staff has been gutted at many of the agencies. So I think there's a real deficit in their capacity to implement, and there's been a real emphasis in this administration on bringing in off-the-shelf offerings from the private sector. I do not know how well the procurement policies that we put in place are being applied. As you might notice, that most of the policies that bind the federal government aren't really being followed unless they're being enforced in court. So I don't assume that these are faring much better. Maybe offline, but yeah, happy to have a conversation.
Thanks for your presentation. What you described really sounds a lot like now, just so challenging. And I wanted to address the sense of isolation for a second. And I've had to really reach beyond sort of organizational confines. And I've started reaching North America, one part of my work and globally, and I'm being really successful. The pandemic helped because we're on Zoom. So I guess I would encourage anyone else that's feeling that way, reach out. It's an uphill struggle, but I've had a lot of success.
Can you share the name of your group?
Well, I work partly at the Berkeley lab. I work in climate research. So there's an organization throughout the Americas. It's one network. There's a corresponding one in Europe. And I didn't even know that I had a counterpart there. So I'm a design technologist. Not very many people working in that space, but I'm going to be partnering with people this fall to work on service.
Thank you. I think that's
One quick question, then we'll.
Fascinating research. Absolutely. Thank you. I would second the comment about how lonely it is to be that person like your organization that sees digital as a solution. Anything that you could do to, as a result of the research, create a forum in which these people connect with one another, force one another, and say, you're doing God's work, and we help you. And in this context, it's good. Social interaction with people who are like-minded.
Absolutely, totally agreed. I think one of the ultimate goals of this research and my dissertation more generally is to kind of increase awareness of this role and how important it is, and hopefully in a way that is really persuasive to funders that these are initiatives that we should be propping up and should not be slicing even as our budgets are getting tighter. Because of course, as everybody knows, if you want to have a community, you have to have resources to be able to kind of help the gears turn. So that's absolutely what I'm. Thanks. Great.
Thank you. Okay, we're almost done. I just wanted to share one little last bit of information with you that hopefully you'll find interesting. So I really enjoyed hearing this afternoon's speakers. One of the things that I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the future directions of the school. Hopefully inspire you a little bit to maybe help make that happen. So if you were at the 106th birthday, we had a mission and vision for the school that are different than they are now. Now, last November, we voted as a faculty to follow a new mission and vision, which is this. That the UC Berkeley School of Information is a global bellwether in a world awash in information and data. And I think we've seen evidence of that today in all the talks that we heard. And we're boldly leading the way with education and fundamental research, again, that you've heard examples of today, that translates into new knowledge, practices, policies, and solutions. So this is the mission that guides the school. And people say, well, what's a bellwether, right? They might have heard the term. A bellwether's a leader that others look to for guidance. Berkeley is one of the best public universities in the world, and we've got great faculty here, and met several people today, and doctoral students as well. The goal is to invest in things that will let us continue to lead and be out in front. The term bellwether, it's spelled with not W-E-A because it's not based on weather, although sometimes bellwethers lead away from storms. It's actually comes from sheep from the Middle Ages. Yes. It's a sheep, a weather, wearing the bell. It's the lead sheep that everybody else looks to for guidance in times of danger. So I've got a little bit of an AI-generated image that will help you remember this. You can detect this immediately, but you can detect it as well, which is my Berkeley bellwether. So this is what Berkeley is. We're the leader that everybody else getting away from the storm, going toward the light is looking to. And we've got a number of projects that help us invest in this. And I wanted to just share a couple of these quickly with you and tell you that there's more along the way. So one, you've heard a little bit from Professor Mulligan. She's been leading this executive fellowship in applied technology policy. This brought some really outstanding people together here at Berkeley who found themselves with a bit of time on their hands. Anytime there's a change in administration, there's change in personnel. So many of these people were part of the previous administration, but there are also people in other organizations that you can see up here. And what happened was that right after the last election, Professor Mulligan and I were sitting together at a conference, and we said, okay, there's going to be a lot of people who have lots of expertise, and it would be a shame for that just to all disappear to the world. So why don't we set up this executive technology policy fellowship? We came up with the name a little bit later, but said, let's have some of these people be fellows here at Berkeley and record that information, write white papers, help teach classes, be able to share that expertise they had based on all of their experience. It's been absolutely phenomenal. They're coming up toward the end of their time. They started back in the spring, and then there's a week coming up here in a second that I'll just mention. But we had a dinner on Monday where several of them, they're talking about how transformative it was to work with the students, to be able to have time to reflect and say, oh, I'm not just rushing into the next thing, but let's write down some of what we learned when we were organizing, when I was in charge of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I was at the EEOC. Let's make sure those lessons don't get lost so that others can learn from them, whether it's in this administration or future administrations. So this is something that we invested in as a new project, and we're grateful to Professor Mulligan, who was in the White House for a period, to be able to use her networks to be able to get people excited about this. But it's something that nobody else did. We were able to step out and be a bellwether that says we can take advantage of the fact that we've got people with expertise who might want to be associated with Berkeley. One of the highlights of this is this Tech Policy Week that's coming up in October. It's a partnership with the Goldman School of Public Policy, where not only the executive fellows, but lots of other people interested in technology policy are going to be coming here to Berkeley to hear what's next. What do we do with technology policy in this ever-changing world? So again, we're leading in this space. Another example of a bellwether project is a program that started this summer, the Oxford Berkeley Summer Doctoral Program. It's a partnership between the Oxford Internet Institute, who saw some logos in the slides about that, the UC Berkeley School of Information, and the Berkeley Center for New Media. This brought 27 doctoral students from around the world here to Berkeley in order to advance their doctoral research, to get guidance from the faculty and from others. 4 of our colleagues from Oxford came over. In the odd numbered years, the doctoral program will be here in Berkeley. In the even numbered years, it'll be in Oxford. And so we'll send a group of faculty over to Oxford next year, and I'll be going as well, to be able to build on this partnership. It's a great community of equals between Oxford and Berkeley, 2 great universities. The summer doctoral program, I used to work at Oxford, has been running for many years, but they were worried after COVID of getting it restarted, and they had to pause it for a bit. And it was like, well, it's a little work to do it every single year. And I'm like, well, we can help make that easier by we do it one year, you do it the next, and then it's not so much of a heavy lift for anybody else. The feedback we got from students after this was phenomenal. The number of social media posts that said, the last 2 weeks changed my life. They changed the way I think about my research. I've got a whole new way of doing what I'm doing. Has been really great. And I think this is the kind of thing, again, we're the only people doing something like this. And so people from around the world, who are doctoral students from around the world who are interested in information, technology, policy, all these other things, are coming to us to get that leadership. We've also hired a bunch of new postdocs here called the Bellwether Postdoctoral Scholars. You can see they come from great organizations that are coming to join us. They're working with 4 different faculty members, including one working with me, to advance both our research and their careers. So this is a strategic investment in hiring postdocs who are at that really exciting stage. They're done with their PhDs, they're thinking about their new projects. They spend about half of their time, 60% of their time, working with a faculty member on the faculty member's project. So again, you can see one's going to be working with Deirdre. And then they spend 40% of the time just on their own projects to be able to develop their own career independently and start getting ready so that when they get that tenure track job that comes after, they've got a grant ready to go and they know exactly where they're going. They're going to have a huge advantage. So we've had one started last month, one starts on October 1st, one on November 1st, and the final one starts in January, and then we're going to be hiring more next year and building up this program. So those are just a few examples. We've got other bellwether projects going on. And if you want to support them, we've got a way to give a little bit of money to help support these priorities. So there's a QR code and a URL. They're also on walls downstairs if you want to take a picture. We've already had some very generous gifts to support the Bellwether Fund. This is designed to have new strategic priorities. Things we wouldn't otherwise be able to do are being able to made possible by this Bellwether Fund. So if that sounds exciting to you, or if you know somebody you think it might sound exciting to, and you'd like them to come to talk to us about that, this is a great way to say, this is stuff that isn't just every day, keeping the place running. It's new stuff that we wouldn't be able to do, such as those examples I just gave and others that are coming up. We're going through strategic planning, and one of the things we have is new priorities that come out of that, but we got to pay for those. And we really appreciate any help that you're able to give, or to be able to help send other people our way who might be excited by some of these things to be able to fund these programs. I do want to mention one more sort of longstanding thing. I mentioned at the lunch today, South Hall is our permanent home. Chancellor Lyons, that was one thing that was a little unclear last year, but now Chancellor Lyons made a decision that this is a permanent home of the high school for the foreseeable future. maybe the next 107 years, I don't know. But one of the things that means is we're investing in the building. So you saw this, the scaffolding on the end. We've got 20 chimneys on the building, none of which do anything because their chimneys are all blocked up, except all 20 of them meet. And so we're fixing, as you can see, some of the marks there with the old leaks. So we're fixing all those so that the building doesn't leak anymore. We've got other plans to do some rejuvenation inside the building. And one of the requests I made, so many of you already heard this, is we're planning on showing more of the history of the school. And so if you've got things that might help us tell that story, we'd welcome you letting us make a digital copy of that and be able to include it in some of the things we're thinking about to tell the long-term history of the school as we think about the next 107 years. And if you know of anybody with $50 million, I've got drawings down at my desk for a way to put an extension on that end of the building that would make it even bigger and brighter. So if you got any $50 million friends, send them my way. I can hook them up. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully you were excited by what you heard today. You're excited about things that are happening here at the school. I'd be happy to talk to you more. We've got cakes and things downstairs. We welcome you to stay and talk to each other, talk to us, have a few snacks. And I really appreciate you all coming and spending your time with us today and being able to celebrate this 107th birthday of a great school that I hope will welcome you. Thanks, everyone.